Now, more on big tech and the crucial role it plays in promoting or suppressing free speech. Facebook's parent company Meta is one of the worst offenders in censoring and suppressing conservatives. You can rail against white people, Western civilization, and Christianity, but if you take a negative view on DEI policies, cultural Marxism, socialism, then you may find yourself censored. But these radical ideas are on the rise again. And as Professor Saad writes on X, we need to combat them. Socialism, communism appeal to many people because on the surface it seems so fair, compassionate and kind. Of course, once you're able to think beyond that of a 5-year-old, you realise that it is the antithesis of fairness, compassion and kindness. It is contrary to human nature and hence it is always doomed to fail. But like the proverbial phoenix, it rises from the ashes to parasitize a new generation of imbeciles. Dr. Saad, visiting professor and global ambassador of Northwood University, an esteemed evolutionary behavioural scientist, joins me now. Dr. Saad, the cultural Marxists seem to be winning the ideological debate. They dominate academia and now their influence has spread well beyond college campuses.
Well, this is one of the things that frustrates me so much, because when I began warning people nearly 3 decades ago that these dreadful ideas were festering on university campuses, people would say to me, exactly to your point, Rita, oh, but don't worry, this is just in some esoteric department in the humanities. But then, of course, I warned them that it starts off in an esoteric department in the humanities, but eventually it becomes our Prime Minister of Canada, it becomes our journalists, it becomes our popular culture. And so the virus has escaped and now it has infected us all.
It has escaped. It is prevalent, certainly in media, in the culture. You look at what Hollywood's producing, what the celebrity class promote. Is there a cure for it? How can we combat something that seems to have spread far and wide? Though I would argue the overwhelming majority of people are still not infected. They still can see the difference between the woke insanity and just common sense, rational views.
Well, in the parasitic mind, I do offer an inoculation against a sort of mind vaccine against all of these parasitic ideas. But let me give you one recent instantiation of this type of parasitic thinking. So, for example, now we see Kamala Harris that has been coronated as, Empress of the world. And the reason why she is resonating so well, because she has hijacked people's emotional systems, right? It's about positive vibes. It's about joy. It's about excitement. It's about fun. And so that's a form of parasitic thinking when you allow your emotional system to take over your cognitive system. Emotions are wonderful. If I'm going down a dark alley and I experience fear because I see 3 young men loitering, it is perfectly evolutionarily relevant for me to feel fear. But if I'm choosing the leader of the free world, I probably should not be basing it on positive vibes and fun. And so at times I feel very pessimistic about the plight of our society. But then if I weren't somewhat optimistic, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed.
Well, you mentioned your best-selling book, The Parasitic Mind, how infectious ideas are killing common sense. Elon Musk said his son was killed by the woke mind virus. His son now identifies as a girl and has transitioned. Explain how wokeness is a virus, and if you've got someone within the family, if you've got wokeness in the workplace, how can you deal with that? How can you help people return to common sense?
Well, the reason why I use the term parasitic rather than just virus is because it actually kills the host in the service of the parasite. So let me give you an analogy before I answer fully your question. So you take, for example, the wood cricket, which is an actual cricket that abhors water. But when it is parasitized by a particular hairworm, the hairworm needs it to jump into water in order for it to complete its reproductive cycle. So when the wood cricket is parasitized by that brain worm, it merrily jumps to its death in the service of the parasite. So this is why it's very important to use the metaphor of parasitic thinking more than the metaphor of virology. How do you resolve that? Well, you resolve it hopefully by people like me constantly beating the drum, standing on top of the mountain, and offering hopefully better ideas. It's a very, very tough battle, but I stand optimistic that we will win eventually the battle of ideas.
Now, the word woke is used often. Many on the left say nobody knows what it means. It's just something that is misused and overused. Do you have a definition for woke?
So originally it started, if I'm going to be charitable, the original term started as, being awakened to, progressive social justice, the bad plight of people. But of course, it has metamorphosized into a much more nasty virus or parasitic idea, which is all things that are related to irrational ideas that originally were spawned on campus. So postmodernism, the idea that there are no objective truths, is the ultimate woke idea, because it is that framework that allows us to state without cracking a smile that a 6'4" guy who has a 9-inch penis can call himself Linda the next day and can suddenly become a woman. If there are no objective truths, then we are certainly not bound to our genitalia. So postmodernism, cultural relativism, social constructivism, all of these things, I argue, is what really defines wokeness. And regrettably, every single one of these dreadful ideas, Rita, originated with professors.
True, true. And you did warn decades ago that it was going to go beyond university campuses, and it certainly has. It's prevalent in workplaces now, in the culture, as we've mentioned. I do like a definition Elon Musk gave for woke. I'll just read that one out. He said, wokeness is divisive, exclusionary, and hateful. It basically gives people a shield to be mean and cruel, armoured in false virtue. And I think that's a nice, simple explanation that I think applies to most settings. Something else you've been writing and talking about recently is suicidal empathy. Explain to my audience what you mean by that, and again, how that can manifest itself.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question. That's actually the topic of my next book that I'm currently working on. So, look, empathy is a noble virtue. Our emotional system has evolved to solve important evolutionary problems. But the problem arises when it misfires. So take, for example, obsessive compulsive disorder, right? Obsessive compulsive disorder is a misfiring of an otherwise adaptive process. For me to wash my hands because I shook the hand of someone that sneezed in his hand makes perfect evolutionary sense. But if I spend the next 8 hours washing my hands, it becomes dysfunctional. So same thing applies for empathy. Within a certain functional zone, to be empathetic makes sense. When it misfires, when it becomes hyperactive, when it targets the wrong individuals, right? When you start caring more about illegal migrants than you do about your own veterans who served in protecting your country, when you care more about homeless people who are doing drugs in the park rather than the children who play in those parks, that's what I call suicidal empathy. When you are so kind-hearted and progressive that you allow millions of people into your country that don't share any of the foundational values that define your host society, that becomes suicidal empathy. So when you take parasitic thinking, the topic of my earlier book, and you couple it with suicidal empathy, you have the perfect cocktail for the end of the West.
Yes, we're in a civilizational war, aren't we? And the anti-West forces seem to be winning. Before you go, you are in Canada. You mentioned your Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has been a poster child for the parasitic mind, the woke neo-Marxists. What state is the country in? And have Canadians finally tired of Trudeau's performative caring routine? Have they finally woken up to the fact that he hasn't actually been fantastic for the country?
Well, they seem to have tired of him, and yet they found a way to elect him on 3 occasions. But I can answer you on a personal level. I'm so tired of him that's precisely why I've taken this visiting professorship and global ambassadorship at Northwood University in Michigan, precisely because I needed to put a pause button on all the woke craziness that's taking place in Canada.
Well, you've got an election coming up next year, so best of luck. Dr. Gad Saad, thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you so much. Cheers.